This week on Major Pain, we'll be chatting with Alex about type 1 diabetes. Before we get into that, I have one big announcement to share with you. As I've mentioned several times on the show recently, I have been looking for some help in producing the show, and I have found it, and I'm so excited about it. This episode was produced with the support of Trisha and Casey Schmidt. Trisha is a regular listener of the podcast. She's part of our Patreon community. And this week, Trisha, Casey, and I have been experimenting with ways that they can take on parts of the production of the show. And that was such a huge help this week because my life has been so remarkably busy, which I do want to tell you a little bit about today as well. So I will be updating the credits at the end of the podcast and adding Trisha and Casey, whom I also just wanted to say thank you so much for helping to produce this week's episode. What a huge relief to finally have some help in producing this show, building a team, one that is being built within the podcast community itself. So I'm very excited about this. As I mentioned, I've been so busy recently, and I just want to tell you about a couple of the awesome things I've been up to. I am now the social media manager for the Majestic Bay Theaters in Ballard, which is a beautiful neighborhood here in Seattle. And we've started hosting retro nights where I either choose movies myself or our social media audience votes on movies to show on the big screen. These are happening either on Monday or Wednesday evenings, and they have been selling out, which is so exciting. And last night we had possibly the most exciting retro night yet. Through our retro night audience, I was actually connected to a guy named Alex Laurent, who was the VFX art director on The Mummy, the 1999 Mummy with Brendan Fraser. So last night we showed The Mummy, and Alex came and gave a presentation about the creation of the film, and it was just such an incredible experience. Doing this type of work is a huge deal for me for a lot of reasons. Obviously, I'm a nerd. I'm a lifelong nerd. My podcasting career started with a science fiction podcast. But as it relates to what we talk about here on this podcast, my health is stable enough to actually schedule an event and show up, which is a huge deal. When I was undiagnosed, that is something I could not do. Hosting a retro night sort of feels like inviting 230 people over to watch a movie. And if something goes wrong, it's on me. And last night was a very technical evening. We had, a PowerPoint presentation from a laptop hooked up to the movie screen. And of course, we had some technical issues, and I'm running around trying to fix things. And the fact that I can do that is really astonishing. And it's because I have a diagnosis. Another exciting thing that's happened recently for me is, I have my side project where I green screen myself into episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation because, as I mentioned, I am a nerd. And I was actually just hired by Fan Home to create an ad where I am advertising their model Starship collection. They've created an official Star Trek Starship collection, and I got to make an ad for it. On top of this, I'm also working as the community manager for Cosmodio Instruments, creating social media for this amazing guitar pedal company started by my friend Barton. We went to NAMM recently, the biggest music expo in the world, and we'll be going to the Portland Synth and Pedal Expo coming up in just a couple of weeks. So yeah, life is just packed full right now. I also work as the relief manager at the Majestic Bay Theaters, so if we need coverage at the theater itself, you might find me there serving you popcorn or checking your tickets at the box office. I'm creating this podcast, and I'm trying to keep my Star Trek project alive, although it has been so hard to keep up with everything. And everything that's happening is just super exciting. These are all dreams come true. All of these jobs are dream jobs for me. The fact that I can do these jobs at all is thanks to my diagnosis, and it's really remarkable. I mean, if you go back to the first episode of this podcast, I was not working. I was barely functional. I was fighting to get on disability, fighting to get a diagnosis, and creating content as a way to have meaning in my life. And now here I am, a full-time professional content creator, which is something that I've wanted to be able to say for about 10 years. So very, very exciting stuff. As I am now assembling a team to help create this podcast, I am more grateful than ever for our financial support that we're getting for this show through Patreon. If you're interested in signing up to support this show, you can head to patreon.com/majorpainpodcast. The funds we are collecting there are now not only supporting me, but also other members of the chronic illness community helping to create this show. We have 3 tiers of support: the $2 per month supporter tier, $7 per month patron tier, and $25 per month producer tier. All tiers come with different levels of recognition and gifts, and everyone gains access to our monthly bonus episodes with myself and my partner Andy. We have fallen behind on these bonus episodes, not just because I've been so busy, but Andy's been super busy as well. She is in a show at the Seattle Rep that is opening this Wednesday night. I can't wait to see it. We have a plan in place to have some catch-up recordings and some other bonus content coming to the Patreon. And we did recently record an episode about our epic honeymoon. Extra special thank you to our Patreon producers supporting this show at the highest tier of $25 per month: Steve Kavanaugh, Chris Fowler, Trish O'Brien, and Hipster Leia. Your continued support is astonishingly generous. Thank you so much. There are other great ways to support this podcast. Our ongoing partnership with Rare Patient Voice, where you can participate in research studies and surveys and get paid for your time. Sign up at rarepatientvoice.com/majorpainpodcast. Our partnership with NeuroHealth. If you need a neurologist and you are sick of waiting for months and months and months for an appointment, check out NeuroHealth. Head to our link, neurohealth.co/majorpain, to get a discount and support this podcast while you sign up. And of course, our Amazon shop. I have listed some products that I use to manage my chronic illness. Or if you start your Amazon shopping trip at the Major Pain shop and then purchase anything at all from Amazon, you will still be supporting this show. Head to amazon.com/shop/majorpainpodcast. We have some excellent episodes of Major Pain coming up for you in the near future. I've recorded some really great ones recently. I'm so excited. Don't forget that we now have a video version of Major Pain. It is available on YouTube and also on Spotify. As we jump into our episode with Alex today, I will remind you that I am not a medical professional. Please do not take any medical action based off what you hear on this podcast without first consulting your doctor.
How lucky it is just to get through a day without pain.
If you look at me, it doesn't appear that I have a disability.
A test that comes back abnormal, it's like, yes, we're onto something here.
Welcome to Major Pain. I'm your host, Jesse Mercury, and I'm so excited this week to be joined by my guest, Alex. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me as a guest.
It is my pleasure. Let's get to know you a little bit before we jump into your story today. So, Alex, why don't you tell us about yourself?
My name is Alex. I love to classify myself as a Midwest guy that should be living on the water. I am a person, anytime I go on trips, I love going to the beach, love water activities, but I'm a person that loves sports. It's either playing sports like baseball, tennis, now pickleball, or going to sporting events. We love here, my family, my friends, we just like to be outside. So we find the next trails to go on and we just enjoy and challenge ourselves. And as my tagline, if you're watching the video, Rise to the Challenge, I am a host of the show called the Rise to the Challenge podcast, where we just have guests from all different backgrounds, from athletes, CEOs, entrepreneurs, people who battle addiction, drugs, health-related things, to share their story and to inspire. And I feel like that tagline fits me so perfectly because I like to challenge myself, get myself out of my comfort zone, be creative, and find new things that I enjoy in life. So Rise to the Challenge is always by my side, and I think a lot of people could relate to that.
Yeah, so cool. What do you think is one experience that sticks out in your mind of a moment where you really pushed yourself out of your comfort zone? Like a moment that is maybe the most extreme version of that?
I think a lot of people may not look at it, but when you've never done one, you're probably like, okay, this would be it. And it would be completing a Tough Mudder. I was always a person that I didn't really get into health and fitness until later in my life. I loved playing sports, but not from a working out standpoint. But when I was looking at ads and videos of Tough Mudders, I was like, I want to do this because I always loved the show American Ninja Warrior, but my all-time favorite was American Gladiators. And doing all of those obstacle courses, I'm like, okay, I need to do something to kind of say I did this. And so I took the opportunity as a Tough Mudder, and I'm like, I have no idea how to train for one. So I thought, I'm just going to do a bunch of cardio and see where it takes me. That was probably the wrong decision to only do cardio because you forget about all the upper body activities. But the one thing I learned, and we'll talk about how it connects later in this episode, but it taught me the endurance, the resilience, the never give up attitude, because no matter how hard the obstacle was, in my first one, it was, I believe, below 50 degrees, freezing cold water and mud. I did not give up. I was not going to quit. I did not want to say, oh, I'm not going to do this event. I wanted to take on every obstacle and be able to say I accomplished it. And by the end, I was like, I can say I did this. So I signed up for another one and then another one. So I think that first one, if you ever thought about doing one, you should do it because you learn so much about yourself that you didn't know when you're crawling in mud and everything.
Yeah, I've heard of the Tough Mudder, and that is pretty extreme. So that's impressive. Well, okay, this has got me so curious about how your health journey is going to weave into this story because obviously physical activity and challenging yourself is a big part of your life's journey. So, Alex, what is your major pain?
So my major pain is type 1 diabetes.
Mm,
At recording this, I've now celebrated almost 17 plus years as a type 1 diabetic from
wow.
middle school to where I am today in my adult stage.
Wow. Diagnosed in middle school.
Yes.
I mean, that must have been a huge challenge. I want to hear all about that. Before we do, type 1 diabetes, I think, is a well known disease, or at least a lot of people have heard of it. But I'll bet that not that many of us really understand it the way that you do, someone who lives with it. So, can you tell us what is type 1 diabetes?
Yes. So type 1 diabetes, from looking at me, you probably might think, well, he has nothing wrong with him. There's nothing to see on the outside, but it's one of those silent diseases, that silent chronic illness. But my pancreas does not produce insulin.
Mm,
And with everyone's bodies, when you're eating carbs and sugars, your pancreas is breaking it down with insulin that it's producing. My pancreas just does not do that. And so anytime that I eat something and I don't take insulin, blood sugars go out of control, symptoms happen. And so we have to inject ourselves with insulin to be at a normal rate through everyday activities. So it's one of those autoimmune illnesses that can happen when you're younger or in an adult stage. I've seen a lot more people in their later lives getting it. And I just unfortunately got it when I was younger, but doesn't even have to be from family history. No one in my family had it. So I just had the lucky draw and I got it.
Do we know anything about what causes type 1 diabetes?
No, because if you look at my life leading up to it, I was probably, from a standpoint, drinking so much soda, eating all the sugar, eating probably not the greatest, but I didn't get type 1 diabetes right away. I actually was in the hospital with bacterial meningitis,
Yikes.
and which deals with the spinal, but my face and body looked like I went through a stroke. So half
Mm,
my face, half my body was kind of drooping and everything. And when we were in the hospital, they told us that I was a type 1 diabetic. So they don't really know when exactly the symptoms were starting. Normal symptoms would be frequent urination, thirsty, energy levels. But I was a person that was playing sports. So I was always drinking water. I was
mm.
constantly drinking. So people thought it was just normal Alex just being himself. So we don't really know how it happens. And I always still think to this day, what was the first sign? Where did it first start? Because did I have it for such a longer period that it was until maybe the last second they're like, okay, we found this in me?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. Something I've wondered about myself and something that comes up a lot on the show because we only live in our own bodies and we only have our own experience. And I've talked to
Yep.
people who had, let's say connective tissue disease and they've been in pain and super flexible and bendy their whole lives. And that's normal to them. And the discovery that other people aren't that way is a surprise. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we can only ever live inside of our own experience. You must have been terrified in middle school to be going through this medical trauma.
Yes, when you are 10, like you're just living your life. You love video games, you love being with friends, and you're kind of at that stage where you don't really know what's happening, but you're just living your life to the
Yeah.
fullest. And when you get that diagnosis, you kind of hear from ads and commercials, kind of like all these type 1 diabetes products and things like that, but you never think it's going to hit you until you actually get the diagnosis. And when I first got diagnosed with it, I think the first thing my whole family was like, what is this going to do with our lives now? What is this going to change for me? Because back then, we did not have the technology that we had today.
Hmm.
So we're doing the normal manual injections, pricking the finger, where today we have technologies to wear and things like that. But I was so curious about, am I still going to be Alex? Am I still going to be that kid that can just go do whatever he wants? And that really kind of was playing through my mind when they're trying to teach me, okay, this is what your life's going to be like. This is what you're going to have to do every day. So it was a lot of nerves, but concern from what's my life going to be like now because everything has now changed.
Yeah, and to get that diagnosis on top of also having bacterial meningitis, I
Yep.
mean, that must have been sort of a serious impact on your life. Like you're going to the hospital, you're stuck in the hospital. How long did it take to get over bacterial meningitis?
So it took about a month. So I was
Wow.
in there for about a week. I had to get a 30 millimeter tubing up my arm into my back. And I had to get like these balloons that would feed liquid into my body. So you're going through that, especially when they send you home, you're still getting the treatment, but then you also have the diabetes on top of it. So it felt like a double whammy. Like,
Yeah.
okay, where's the third item? What are we missing now at this point? Where's the third strike? But I feel that the bacterial meningitis kind of like it came and left. And I
Yeah.
thought diabetes would have been that same way. It's going to come, it's going to leave. But then just kept on going, still going.
Yeah, yeah. It's so frustrating when those things turn on and don't turn off. It feels so
Yeah,
unfair. And there's so many diseases that are like that. And I mean, my disease is like that. And I look back into my early childhood when I could do all these things that I can't do now, you know, like eat kimchi. I can't have anything that's got high histamine in it or I
yeah,
get extremely sick. And it's like, man, I used to be a kombucha nerd. So like, what happened? Why can't I still do that? That was healthy. What's the deal? But there's no choice there. Like, there's nothing you can do. The only choice is to do what your body needs.
correct.
And you just have to make that choice and keep making it every day. And it's a lifelong companion that just rides along with you. Do you have any idea how you got bacterial meningitis?
At this time, no.
Wow.
Like, I look back at it, I'm like, I didn't do anything that was like out of the ordinary. Even my doctors don't know. They kind of still had no idea, even years after. But it's like diabetes. It's like, how did it come about? And
Yeah.
like, why at that point, at that time? Was it a calling or something? Because I always look at, did bacterial meningitis save me in a way? Did
Yeah.
kind of tell me, okay, you are a diabetic now. You have to basically start taking insulin now. Because if I didn't go into the hospital with bacterial meningitis, when would I found out
Hmm.
that I was a type 1 diabetic? Was it
Yeah.
going to be years later? Or would it be a more serious injury or condition that I would be in that would have resulted in me finding out? So I almost say bacterial meningitis kind of saved me in a way.
Hmm.
Um, as much as we don't like to say a condition saves us, but it helped me get that diagnosis so I could start the treatment to get better.
It totally makes sense to me, especially because my limited knowledge of diabetes, I know that if it goes untreated, it can cause some serious damage. So, okay, you're like 10 years old in middle school, your whole life changes overnight. What did it look like in middle school? Are you, checking your blood sugar all the time? I know these things have changed a lot. You just mentioned how the technology has evolved. When you kicked off your diabetes journey, what was the technology and what was the daily impact on a child going to school, suddenly having to deal with this chronic health condition?
I always look back, and even to this day, I have my diabetes back, and started it right away where you have all your equipment, your blood sugar meter, your insulin pen, you have like your Jolly Ranchers I used for like low blood sugars back then because that was the only thing I could like because I did not like glucose tablets because it tasted like chalk at the time, but you're bringing all these equipment with you everywhere you go. So taking it to school, you had to go to the nurse's office every single time for lunch or before you went to gym class because you had to take your blood sugar and you had to take your insulin. When you are at home, you're taking it 3 to 4 times a day. One in the morning, one when you're before dinner, one before you go to bed. So it's like you're basically taking your life, putting it into a routine and schedule, and you're just doing it on loop every single day.
Hmm.
And as a kid, there would be times where I'm like, oh, I have to go test my blood sugar. Like I hated doing it because I felt like is someone going to pick on me because I had to do this? And imagine like you're a kid, you're the only one that's a type 1 diabetic at that time, and you're kind of feeling like an outcaster. Like you're on this solo island dealing with this. No one
Yeah.
can relate with you. And even your friends are trying to figure out what type 1 diabetes is because they've never experienced someone with it. So you're trying to explain it to them. But I felt very isolated
Hmm.
when I was at school because I would be the person that would be late to gym class because I had to go do my blood sugar or I had to go do insulin or I'm late to lunch because I had to go take blood sugar and do insulin. So, especially at that age, not I wasn't really bullied, but you have people that are judging you or talking about you in a way, but never felt like I was being bullied for it because it was my life. Like it's either you stay alive and do the things you need to do, or you risk complications over time.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my questions for you is did you feel like you were bullied for it? And that feeling of isolation is so tough when there's something happening to you that is a fundamental part of your day every
Yeah.
day and no one else is doing it. And we live in a society that makes everyone feel weird about that, but we all have our thing.
Yeah.
Everyone has their thing that is unique. And I wish that we could live in a society where that could be appreciated and celebrated. But instead, differences are feared and it's a constant and it's really, really tough. I've talked to so many people on this show who have felt like they have lost friends once they got diagnosed with something because people didn't want to engage with them about anything hard that they were going
Yep.
through. Did you have a strong friend group when you were 10 years old and moving on through school? Did you feel like you had people surrounding you that supported you in this journey?
With middle school and high school, yes. I would say my friend group was very supportive. They were more curious about things, and the more that they were educated, the more they understood. And I always told friends, even today, I go, just ask me. Like, I would rather you ask me questions than you suggesting that you know the answer and it's completely wrong. And so when you go through even high school, it's always like, I always use the phrase that everyone knows what diabetes is. You can't eat this, you can't have that, which at that time, we thought that was true. We could not eat everything we wanted, and we can only eat certain things. And over time, I learned that's not true. But everyone was worried when I couldn't eat something because they thought I couldn't eat it. And so they were like, oh, well, we can't have this because Alex can't have it. And so the more that they learned why wasn't doing it, they're like, okay, now I understand. Now
Yeah.
I reason. And I think it built that bond even more.
Yeah, totally. How has this changed for you over the years? I think you said 17 years, is that right?
Correct.
Okay,
17,
so you're like 27-ish right now.
29. But I wish I was younger, but
Okay, so you're about 29. Um, what has the journey looked like from when you were diagnosed to now? How has the technology changed? And how has your relationship with this disease changed?
so I classify my story as from rebellious to transformative.
Mm,
If you've looked at my life when I was going in the first 5 to 10 years as a diabetic, you would probably think, Alex, you're doing the wrong thing. Why are you being so rebellious? And over time, I try to say, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I always like to challenge myself. And that was still, even when I was younger, I did that. I would challenge my body with the things that I ate, how I took my
mm.
diabetes management. I tried to test myself to see how far I could take it and get away with it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it didn't work. There was a spring break that I was in the hospital twice
Wow.
because of diabetes management. When I moved out, I really had to get my management under control. But I tried to test myself, and that's why I was very rebellious. And I think I was guilty and was very, when I look back at it, be like, I don't know why I did that. Like, I could be 17 plus years on a positive track the whole entire time, but maybe I needed those setbacks to get to that transformative stage in my life right now and say, I went through that and I know how to go through that. And then I can help others go through that.
Hmm.
And leading up to now with technology, you have the continuous glucose monitors that you wear where it can kind of keep track every 5 minutes what your blood sugar is so you can take actions ahead of time. You have insulin pumps that you can wear on you that you just have to use a device to take insulin instead of doing the manual injections.
Wow.
And I think those technologies helps people with managing it much better. And I feel I didn't really start going into transformative with the devices on me. I was still doing it the manual way. But once I really understood diabetes and I was really on my own, living on my own, out of my parents' house, my own everything, I knew this was the change that I needed to happen because if I can't do it on my own and I have my family freaking out hours and 30 minutes away, they're not going to be happy with me because they're going to have to worry that they're going to get a 911 call and that they're going to take a long time to drive just to get to me. But I feel today I'm in the best place that I've ever been. And that has happened in the last 6 years, six,
Hmm.
7 years. I've been much stronger. My management is so much better. You see a change in me with friends, family, work, just attitude, energy, mood. So it's a long 17 years from rebellious to transformative, but I don't regret anything that I went through because I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't go through those.
Yeah, totally. I totally relate to this. Absolutely. And as we were talking about before, when an illness turns on and doesn't turn off ever again, it feels unfair. And I think we all go through this thing where we kind of push it and challenge it and test it and say, okay, well, I just went through this good stretch for the last month. And
Yep.
I think I don't need to do the thing that I was doing anymore, you know? So let's eat this thing I shouldn't, or stay up too late, or, go to party and drink, or whatever it is that flares you up. And then it flares you up again, and you're like, God, dang it. It like, I
Yep.
wish that would just go away. And if you do that enough times, you get to the point where you just accept it. It's not going away. No amount of rebellion is going to change the fact that this disease is with me for life. And then you have to kind of embrace it and almost love it a little bit. It's a piece of you that you have to incorporate into you, and then it changes you. And I think oftentimes for the better. I think that's, one of the overarching themes of this show is the way in which living through these challenges can actually make your life better in ways that you wouldn't expect. And yes, all of us don't necessarily like being sick all the time, but there are life lessons and changes in the way that you approach your life that can lead to higher levels of happiness or more sustained happiness. It's very, very unusual. I'm hearing it from you for sure. So when we talk about transformative, what is that transformation? Can you define that for us?
So I mentioned earlier how really health and fitness wasn't really a big thing of mine, even though I was active. And I always called myself a wild card athlete because I didn't look like an athlete, but you put me out there on the court or the field and I shock people and mouths are dropped. But really, when I started getting into more of the nutrition, the fitness, the
Mm-hmm.
workouts, it really not just changed my mind, my body, my health, but it helped me manage my diabetes even more because it made me more aware of what things were causing my blood sugars to drop. Where did I get the right steady track line? So it really helped me become who I am. The last few years I've been losing, I lost almost over 40 pounds.
Wow.
And I never thought I would be able to do that because I did not have the confidence in myself. I was like, I want to look like this. I just don't know how to get there. So I was working with people, working with coaches and fitness, and they helped me get to the body that I want. And as I mentioned, transformative, we're still transforming. I mean, we are excited to see what the future has, but I feel more confident because my diabetes management is under control. I was talking to someone the other day and I said, I kind of forgot my blood sugar was even happening for a whole day because when you have your management under control, you kind of look at that and you're like, I don't need to look at it every second. So if there are diabetics listening to it, really getting your management under control can help you focus on the greater things that you have in your life, your family, your friends, your loved ones, your passions. You can focus on that because diabetes is under control. But you kind of mentioned how with things that we hear, I always say diabetes, people think perfection is so important, but perfection is an illusion.
Hmm.
I'm not a perfect diabetic. There's those setbacks that we have because there's no diabetic that is 100% perfect. And if there is, they're lying to you because it's impossible. But those setbacks make you even stronger when you get back up from it. Kind of how you rise to the challenge. When I go through those setbacks, I get right back up. I say, I am now prepared to tackle that head on if it happens again. So I always say diabetics has taught me so much about myself that I have enjoyed the process because I learn new skills. I learn new attitude. I learn new situation awareness just through type 1 diabetes.
Yeah. I know that my chronic illness has had a huge impact on my personal relationships. Is that something you've experienced as well?
When I first was dating, I always thought, don't tell them you're a diabetic. Like, kind of prepare for blood sugars and insulin prior, or the girl gets up and take your insulin through that. But my fiance now, I was grateful that she had family members that were diabetics. They were
Hmm.
type 2s, and she understood what they had to go through. And the first few months, I was kind of, okay, Alex, you can't be strict about certain things because she's not going to understand. But the more she understood why I did things, my schedule, she kind of appreciated that because she's like, you're so on top of things. Like you're aware of your health. You're so focused to making sure you're good. And she's seen me at my lowest times with the diabetes because sometimes we have those challenges. But when she sees me rise back up, she's proud. And I love that she stands by me because there are people that will run away from
Hmm.
it. They'll be like, I don't want to deal with this guy. He has this condition. I don't know how to be there for him. She learned why I do certain things. Why do I go into routines? And she kind of incorporates that into hers. Like my eating schedule helps with my management, so we eat at certain times. We just went on a vacation and that changed everything. So she kind of saw how do I adjust with things like that. So having her by my side has been so helpful because a lot of people will just they'll run away. They
Hmm.
won't deal with the conditions. And I think there's a lot of diabetics that might have been relating to that because they feel alone. They feel isolated. They may not know how to meet people because of their condition, but we want to empower them to say, this is going to be your life. You're going to find that person that is going to accept you for who you are. I've been grateful that I found that person
Yeah.
that sticks by me because it's a hard condition. And someone living with it where I have to wake up in the middle of the night with a low blood sugar and my devices are going off. It's not easy for someone that is with me. So I've been very lucky to have someone by my side.
Yeah, that's amazing. When your blood sugar is low, what happens? What does it feel like?
So there's so many symptoms with low blood sugars. Sometimes you're out of energy, you're out of breath. Your body just feels like it wants to drop. Sometimes you sweat. Sometimes you have like a feel or a taste that's off. It's never everything at once. And sometimes the symptoms are random on what happening. For me, it's always my energy level is low. But sometimes how I speak
Hmm.
with people, they notice that I sometimes slur my words. My family members think sometimes I'm drinking. And even though I rarely drink, but that's what it sounds like, as someone that has been drinking and slurring their words. And so anytime they think I'm that, they always are like, hey, what's your blood sugar? And then sometimes I go and check, and sometimes I'm fine, sometimes I'm low. So even people know my symptoms, even though I may not even see it at those points. But those are kind of the symptoms that I see for myself. And every diabetic is so different. Like someone might not have those same symptoms, but they might have their own variation of them for lows.
Do you have any practical tips for other people living with type 1 diabetes? Things that you've picked up over the years that you think are helpful for others to know?
It's more than just the physical work with diabetes. And when I say physical work, it's more than just taking your blood sugar, doing insulin, what you're eating. But over time, it is all about your mindset. If you are focused on what you're trying to achieve with diabetes, with it being in a time and range, feeling good throughout the day, having that energy to tackle on any project that you're doing, it's going to help your physical work with diabetes even more. And I think people are so out of routines that they feel it's like a second job to them. They're working their 40-hour job, or if they're an entrepreneur, they're working overtime, but then they have to deal with their diabetes at the same time. So make sure that your mindset is on point, because it's not perfection. You shouldn't be thinking as it's perfection, but you're going to grow from it each and every day. Come back with those setbacks and become even stronger.
Yeah, awesome. What is the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes?
So type 2 is their diabetes. They can kind of produce insulin in a way. Usually it can be cured through sometimes nutrition, through medicine, and things like that. Type 1, you cannot cure unless it's pancreatic transplant, or I know nowadays they're doing stem cell research and therapy, but even those are not even 100%. But type 2, it's more that you're coming from a nutrition aspect, with your pancreas kind of can produce. You're using different kind of tools and stuff that a type 1 diabetic can't. A lot of times you'll see commercials for diabetes products, and it's always type 2 diabetes. But if you have type 1, you can't use this.
Hmm.
So you kind of are more subjective to finding more answers with type 2 than a type 1. Now, I don't know what it's like to live as a type 2 because I only have type 1, but you can utilize the same tools that a type 1 does with a type 2. You have to make sure your nutrition is on point. Health and wellness needs to be on point. Your mindset has to be on point, because you're going through similar journeys. It may not be the exact road, but you have to go on that same path. So there is a big difference, and there's even more different with LADA, which it deals with I think it's later adult diabetic diagnosis. I might have the words wrong, but they have their own. You have pre-diabetes. So there's so many diabetic terms and terminologies that it's kind of like we're all one big family. We just
Yeah.
have different parts. And even with chronic illness, you see all the different chronic illnesses under the umbrella, and we're all going through our own journeys, but we all can support each other in similar ways, because there's something that we can all do that connects us with each of our illnesses.
Yeah, totally. We did a great episode a little while back about diabetes insipidus, which is a really interesting disease. Yeah, and like you said, several different forms of this disease, but each person's journey is unique with each different form of the disease.
Yep.
So whoever you talk to, it's going to be slightly different. But there is that commonality of experience, not just across other people with diabetes and for you type 1, but just chronic illness in general. You know, so much of what you're saying with a completely different disease is something that I relate to, things that I've been through with my disease that is completely different, has nothing to do with diabetes at all. So when you're going to go on a Tough Mudder or something like that, when you're pushing your body to the extreme, are there extra steps that you need to take to prepare for that? Is there like extra tools that you bring in your diabetes bag if you're going to go on a Tough Mudder?
Funny that you mentioned that because both Tough Mudders, I had different technology on for each one. So what I did on the first one, I had to do completely different for the second one. So that first one that I did, I was basically doing I was on a pump that was connected by a tube. So I basically had to take that off and I was basically with no insulin, no pump on me at all. I had to do manual injections if I needed it and I had to bring my blood sugar meter. So I got one of those water fanny packs that you wear that you can basically submerge yourself underwater. And I'm like running through the course wearing it because I didn't want to not be prepared with the items in case there was an emergency. So I kind of was over planning. I had snacks every water station. I made sure to stay at, test my blood sugar to see where I was at. And I found that with my management being under control, it actually stayed flatline in my range the whole entire time. Even though I had to do extra steps to take care of it, that was important to me. Making sure that I could enjoy it without having to think about my diabetes throughout the course. When I went to the second one, I now had a CGM monitor on me. So it was testing my blood sugar. I was a tubeless pump. And so I still had to go through the similar, making sure I could take care of it if I need to. But I didn't check my blood sugar throughout the second one because I knew from my first experience, my body was kind of used to it and I could be okay. So I did blood sugars at the beginning and the end, and I noticed from my graph, it stayed flatline.
Hmm.
So it kind of gave me even more confidence. So now going into the third one, I'm like, okay, how am I going to tackle that? Am I going to continue what I did on my second one or try something new? But I prepared myself no matter what with just from training and being able to get my management under control because I wanted to focus on the Tough Mudder. I didn't want diabetes to control me. I wanted to control diabetes. And I wanted to thrive with type 1 diabetes and not let it affect the fun that I was doing on the Tough Mudder course.
Yeah. And do you feel like you achieved that?
Yes. I
Yeah.
look back at it and I say, I did it. And when people that are listening to this and different illnesses might look at it differently, if you say you can't do something, you can do it. And I think a lot of diabetics say that they can't do something. I was guilty of that growing up, saying, oh, I can't do this because of diabetes. I now tell myself I can do it because diabetes is not going to control my life.
Wow, that's an interesting thing. I'm going to think on that for a while. Very interesting. Well, I have one more question for you. So I'm really fascinated by your transformation and this period in your journey where you're sort of rebelling against diabetes and then you embrace it and then you are capable of so much more than you ever expected yourself to be able to do. If you could go back in time and talk to yourself before the transformation and give yourself a piece of advice about how to achieve that transformation, what would it be?
Be more proactive with my diabetes. Don't test yourself to the limit and see what you can get away with. Because younger me was that kind of rebellious child. Even if you take diabetes out of it, I was still that rebellious child. But knowing what I know today, even if we didn't have the technology, the same systems would still be implemented back then. You have to make sure your blood sugars are on point. You have to make sure you're calculating carbs correctly. I would say be more proactive and don't let it stop you from being who you are. I would tell me that every single time, and I wish I wish that was what I did back then, but then I wouldn't be where I am today. And you kind of have to say you can't regret the past, but you just keep on moving forward towards the future.
Yeah, great advice. Alex, you've done such a good job today. You know, every single episode of this show, I learned something about living with chronic illness. And, you know, if anyone would be an expert on it, it'd be me, right? I have one and I host this show, but I've never felt like an expert on living with chronic illness because it is different for every person. And every single person brings something to the table that is worth hearing. And you've absolutely done that today. I really appreciate it. Please tell us where people can go to connect with you online. Anything else you'd like to plug? Your podcast? Tell us where to find it.
So I am a type 1 diabetic coach, the coach for Thrive with Type 1 Diabetes. So we help type 1 diabetics, type 1 diabetic parents and spouses empower their mindsets and thrive with diabetes. So we want to
Awesome.
help you with your routines, your lifestyle to make sure that diabetes doesn't control you, you control it. So you can find us at my Instagram, AlexBurket23, TikTok, AlexBurket1. If you have diabetes and you need that guidance, that support, that empowerment, send me a message. And also, you can check out all my episodes of the Rise to the Challenge podcast on YouTube, all the major audio platforms. Share my story within those episodes, but you might find something new about your favorite person or someone that has gone through a similar journey as you and learn even more. But I'm always a message away for any support and help because my job is to empower people.
Amazing. And that's so cool that you're doing diabetes coaching. I mean, there's got to be people out there who are maybe listening to this who have diabetes and who are struggling and are feeling like they can't get this disease under control. And here is a resource for you. So that's really exciting. And I'll tag you everywhere when this episode goes live. People can follow this show at Major Pain Podcast. We're on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And I will tag Alex everywhere this podcast goes out. Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really, really appreciate you sharing your time and your story with us.
Thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I had a great time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Major Pain. I'm Jesse Mercury, the creator of this podcast, with support from Trisha and Casey Schmidt. Artwork by Egg Salad Salad. Our theme music is the song Time Machine from my synthpop album Sci-Fi, now streaming everywhere. Join our community on social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Major Pain Podcast. If you have questions or comments you'd like to share with myself, our guests, or our listeners, send an email to majorpainpodcast@gmail.com. You can also head to our website to learn more about this show, support its creation, or leave a comment on any episode at majorpainpodcast.com. Major Pain is supported by our listeners on Patreon. Thank you to our $2 per month supporters, our $7 per month patrons Naomi Adele Smith, Sonny Roberts, Kelsey Matson, Alexandria Henderson, Justin Minnick, Laura Stevens, Heather Muncie, and Robert, and our $25 per month producers Steve Kavanaugh, Chris Fowler, Trish O'Brien, and Hipster Leia. Learn how you can support this podcast while receiving special recognition on the show, gifts, and monthly bonus episodes at patreon.com/majorpainpodcasts.